The sound of steel closing shut echoed in the narrow maintenance bay. Click. The cuffs bit into Emma Carter's wrists at exactly 0800 hours. She hadn't even washed her hands yet. Grease clung beneath her fingernails, black streaks smeared across her arms, the lingering scent of machine oil still hanging in the air. An hour earlier she had been bent over an air filter, lungs full of dust and desert heat. Now she stood frozen under the stare of two military policemen. Stolen valor, the MP sergeant spat, as though the words themselves were poison. His voice was sharp, brimming with disdain reserved only for those who dared to dishonor the uniform. That's a federal crime. Emma didn't flinch. She just stared at the wrench that had slipped from her hand, now lying on the concrete floor, its metallic clang still ringing in her ears. She knew this day would come. But what no one standing in that maintenance bay could imagine was that 6 hours later, a decorated admiral would step into her cell, glance at the compass tattoo etched into her skin, and whisper words that would unravel everything. Your intel missed one hell of a warrior. Emma Carter had been nobody for 18 months. At Forward Operating Base Orion, tucked into the scorching sands of northern Syria, she was just another civilian contractor lost in a sea of forgettable faces. 5'4", auburn hair wound tight into a bun that always seemed too regulation for someone not in uniform. Hands calloused, skin permanently marked with oil and hydraulic stains. She fixed air conditioners when the desert heat tried to suffocate the base. She kept the water pumps alive, ensuring 3,000 soldiers stayed hydrated. She didn't gossip. She didn't complain. She spoke only when spoken to. And she had mastered the art of being invisible. Or at least she thought she had. Because one man noticed her. Sergeant John Holloway had been in the Army for 23 years. Long enough to know when something didn't fit. And Emma Carter didn't fit. He noticed it first in the way she moved. Not like a mechanic. Not like a civilian. Like a soldier. The way she instinctively checked corners before stepping into a hallway. The way her eyes swept a room, not lazily, but sharp, assessing exits, shadows, people. The way she always carried a worn brass compass in her pocket, its edges smoothed by countless hands. He couldn't let it go. Contractors don't move like that, John muttered one night over a poker game in the recreation tent. Cards slapped against the table. The desert wind howled outside. Across from him, his friend Michael Baptiste, an intelligence analyst with a face that never betrayed emotion, raised an eyebrow. Maybe she's prior service. Happens all the time. Not in her file, John shot back. His voice dropped lower, as though admitting the thought aloud might summon trouble. I pulled her background check. Says she worked at a John Deere dealership in Nebraska for 8 years. No service record. No deployments. Nothing. Baptiste dealt another hand, his fingers slow and deliberate. Then either she's a liar, he looked up, eyes narrowing, or someone scrubbed her past clean. John didn't answer, but he already knew which one he believed. The truth lay hidden in that compass. It wasn't a trinket from a surplus store. It wasn't some nostalgic keepsake. It was a relic, a survivor's mark, a memorial to an operation that had never officially existed. Operation Iron Dawn. 7 of America's finest had died that night, buried not just in foreign sand, but under classified files and redacted reports. The coordinates etched on the back of Emma's compass marked the very ground where those lives had been extinguished and where her own had been reborn. No one knew that yet, but John Holloway's suspicions were growing sharper by the day, and Emma's silence was becoming harder to keep. 3 weeks later, during a routine safety briefing, everything unraveled. Lieutenant Morrison, fresh out of West Point, eyes too bright, uniform too crisp, was lecturing soldiers on how to identify IEDs. His voice carried certainty, but his words carried danger. Emma sat at the back, grease still smudged across her knuckles, listening as he explained how a pressure plate device could be stepped on without detonation, so long as the soldier moved quickly enough. Her jaw tightened. Her hand slipped into her pocket, thumb tracing the cold brass of the compass. She tried to bite her tongue, tried to stay the invisible mechanic she had built herself to be. But memories of screams, of sand turning red, of Rodriguez and Sterling and the others who had died because of bad intel. Those ghosts would not let her stay silent. "That's not how pressure plates work," Emma said softly. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward her. The mechanic. The nobody. The invisible one. Morrison's face flushed crimson. "Excuse me." Emma's voice sharpened, stronger now, fueled by the weight of too many funerals. Pressure plates don't need significant weight. They're designed to trigger with almost nothing: wind, a shift in sand, a single boot. "What you're teaching will get someone killed." The words hung in the air like a live grenade. The young lieutenant sputtered, his pride pierced. Soldiers whispered. And in the corner of the room, John Holloway leaned forward, eyes narrowing. There it was. The slip he'd been waiting for. "How?" he asked slowly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Would a maintenance contractor from Nebraska know the operational specifics of enemy IEDs?" Emma froze. Her carefully built disguise shattered in seconds. Her only defense was a weak lie. "I read a lot." But the look on Holloway's face told her everything. The hunt had begun. The MPs came at dawn the next day. The base loudspeaker had barely finished the morning call when they knocked at her door. Emma was already awake, sitting on the edge of her cot, hands clasped, waiting. John Holloway stood in the doorway with two MPs at his side. His voice was flat, official, but carried a weight that even he didn't fully understand. "Emma Carter, you are under arrest for violation of the Stolen Valor Act, fraudulent representation of military service, and potential breaches of operational security. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked shut. Her wrench fell to the floor with a clang. The soldiers looked at her, expecting fear. Instead, they found calculation, cold eyes, silent resolve. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting. And in 6 hours, the woman who was supposed to be dead would come face to face with an admiral who knew the truth. The ghosts Emma had been running from were finally coming back. But were they here to save her or bury her for good? The holding cell smelled of bleach and concrete. Cold, sterile, forgettable. Emma Carter sat on the narrow cot, wrists cuffed in front of her, posture impossibly straight for someone accused of being a fraud. The guards had expected resistance, maybe tears. Instead, she was still silent as stone. Master Sergeant Rita DeLuca had broken countless liars in her 15 years of interrogations. Men who wore medals they never earned. Women who claimed deployments they had never seen. They all cracked eventually. They always slipped. But something about this woman was different. DeLuca entered with a file under her arm, her boots echoing across the floor. She set the folder on the metal table and studied Emma with the gaze of a hunter who'd learned patience long ago. "Let's start simple," DeLuca said, voice calm measured. "Your record says no military service. Yet yesterday, you corrected a lieutenant on ordnance disposal procedures. Procedures you should have no knowledge of. Care to explain that contradiction?" Emma lifted her eyes. They were steady, too steady. "I never claimed military service," she said softly. "And I never said I didn't have it." The words were careful, deliberate, like someone walking across a minefield. DeLuca made a note. She decided to push harder. "Tell me about basic underwater demolition training," DeLuca demanded. Emma didn't blink. "Which part?" The sergeant leaned in. "All of it." Emma's voice came without hesitation. "The 50-meter underwater swim. The IBS surf passage. Or Hell Week, when you're hauling telephone poles through freezing surf until your shoulders give out and you're running on nothing but stubbornness and will." DeLuca froze. Those details weren't in books. Civilians called them rafts or dinghies, not IBS. The way Emma said it, it wasn't memorized. It was lived. She needed to be sure. "What's your rate of fire with an M4 carbine in sustained combat?" Emma answered instantly. 12 to 15 rounds per minute, if you don't want to overheat the barrel. "But in the real world?" Her eyes darkened. "You're not firing at paper targets. You're firing at shadows and echoes. Most fights are over in seconds. If you're still shooting after 5 minutes, somebody already screwed up. A silence fell. That wasn't textbook. That was experience. From the corner, Dr. Sarah Hines, the psychiatrist observing the session, looked up sharply. Her pen stilled. She recognized trauma when she heard it. This wasn't play acting. This was memory. The next test wasn't words. It was flesh. "We need to check for identifying marks," DeLuca said, her tone careful, almost apologetic. "Tattoos, scars, anything that confirms service." Emma stood slowly, removing her work shirt. The room shifted. Her back was a battlefield. 3 surgical scars stretched across her shoulder blades. Damage no civilian accident could explain. Burns laced her left side, healed in jagged patches that only explosions left behind. And then the tattoo. A compass rose, black ink etched with impossible precision, sitting just beneath her left shoulder blade. At first glance, art. At second glance, coordinates. Tiny numbers, barely visible. 32.3078 north, the medic read aloud, voice faltering. 44.3658 east. DeLuca's blood ran cold. Those numbers weren't random. They were Iraqi coordinates. And not just any. They matched a location buried so deep in classified files that even mentioning it could be considered treason. A place whispered about only once in her career, linked to a mission called Iron Dawn. Officially, that mission never happened. Unofficially, it had saved dozens of lives. And according to every report, every member of that team had died in the process. So how was Emma Carter standing here, alive, with their coordinates carved into her skin? At 1847 hours, Master Sergeant DeLuca did something she had never done in her career. She picked up the secure line, encrypted channels humming as she spoke directly to the Pentagon. "This is DeLuca, Forward Operating Base Orion," she said, voice tight. "We have a potential classification breach involving special operations history." The voice on the other end was flat, analytical. "Describe the subject." DeLuca hesitated, then spoke. Female, mid-30s. Auburn hair. Multiple surgical scars from blast injuries. Compass tattoo with Iraqi coordinates. Coordinates tied to Operation Iron Dawn. The line went silent. For 30 seconds, all she heard were faint clicks, distant typing, muffled voices conferring. When the voice returned, it sounded shaken. "Master Sergeant, suspend all investigation immediately. Do not discuss this case with anyone outside your chain. Admiral Sofia Vasquez will arrive at your location at 0600 hours tomorrow with full authority. Until then, secure the subject and restrict access to all related information." The line went dead. DeLuca stared at the phone, her hands cold. In 15 years, she had never heard fear in a Pentagon official's voice. Until now. Across the ocean, Admiral Sofia Vasquez had not slept in 22 hours when the encrypted call came through. She had been drowning in budget reports at her Pentagon office when the secure line lit up, its shrill warble slicing the monotony in half. The briefing that followed was clinical, detached. But beneath the words, she heard something that made her heart stop. A woman, alive, claiming knowledge of Iron Dawn. Vasquez's throat tightened. 6 years ago, she had buried that mission. Buried it under silence, secrecy, and folded flags handed to grieving families. All of them dead, the report had said. All of them gone. She had looked mothers in the eye. She had told them their children died heroes. She had told herself the same. But if Emma Carter was alive, then everything had been a lie. The Black Hawk touched down on the landing pad at dawn. Its rotors whipped sand into furious spirals as Admiral Vasquez stepped onto the base, her uniform immaculate despite the overnight flight. Her aide jogged at her side, shouting over the wind, "Ma'am, the situation report describes a stolen valor case that escalated into." Vasquez cut him off, her voice sharp as steel. "That woman isn't stolen valor. She's a ghost. And ghosts don't come back without dragging secrets behind them." She marched toward the holding cells, every step heavy with the weight of 6 years of unanswered questions. And on the other side of that steel door, Emma Carter waited, hands trembling, eyes steady. Two women, bound by the same night, about to face the truth neither was ready to say aloud. And when Admiral Vasquez stepped inside at 0600 hours, the first word out of Emma's mouth wasn't "sir." It was "Admiral." A recognition that shattered the silence and confirmed the impossible. The steel door groaned open at exactly 0600 hours. Leather shoes clicked against concrete. The air seemed to still. Emma Carter rose from the cot. Her wrists were free now, though the faint red marks remained, silent proof of her night in chains. She looked up, steady, controlled, and locked eyes with the woman in navy dress blues. Admiral Sofia Vasquez. For a heartbeat, the world fell away. 6 years of silence collapsed into a single, impossible moment. "Admiral," Emma said. Just one word. Quiet. Steady. But heavy with recognition. Sofia Vasquez felt her throat tighten. She had not heard that voice since the night she buried an entire unit under a flag of secrecy. "Show me," Vasquez said softly, her tone carrying the weight of command that had never left her. Emma knew what she meant. Without hesitation, she turned, lifting her shirt to bare the ink carved beneath her shoulder blade. The compass rose glistened under the fluorescent lights. More than a tattoo, it was a story etched in flesh. At its base, small coordinates, and beneath them, an anchor with the number 7. Vasquez staggered, her composure cracking. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "SEAL Team 7. Emma turned back, eyes hard. "What's left of it?" "We thought you were dead," Vasquez said finally, lowering herself into the metal chair opposite Emma. For the first time in decades, the Admiral's voice trembled. Emma sat too, posture unyielding. "That's because you told the world I was." The explosion took out the entire compound, Vasquez pressed, as if trying to convince herself. The extraction point collapsed. "We recovered remains. Dog tags. There was no way." "You found Maria Rodriguez's tags." Emma's voice cracked for the first time, though she forced it steady. She touched the compass that hung on a chain around her neck. Its brass was worn smooth. "She threw them to me before the building came down. Made me swear I'd tell her family she died fighting, not executed like an animal." The Admiral closed her eyes. Maria Rodriguez, 26, a linguistics specialist who could disappear into any Middle Eastern crowd. One of the brightest the team had gone, or so she had thought. The weight of all the folded flags she had delivered over the years pressed down on her chest like stone. Emma leaned forward, her voice colder now. "You searched 72 hours, Admiral. Dug through rubble until your men collapsed. And still, intelligence said no survivors. No chance. Case closed." Sofia swallowed hard. Because there wasn't supposed to be any chance. Emma's eyes narrowed. "So you admit it. We weren't lost. We were sacrificed." The room chilled. Emma reached into her boot and withdrew something impossibly small, a micro SD card. She placed it on the metal table with deliberate care, as if it were live ordnance. 6 years of evidence, she said. Logs, transfers, meetings, travel manifests. Everything I needed to prove what really happened that night. Vasquez stared at the card, her pulse hammering. "What are you saying?" Emma's voice dropped to a razor's whisper. "That we weren't betrayed by chance. We were sold." Her next words landed like a detonation. Deputy Director Malcolm Thornfield, Defense Intelligence Agency. 9 years selling classified ops to foreign services. SEAL Team 7 was getting too close. We were a liability, so he buried us in Iraq. Sofia Vasquez recoiled. Malcolm Thornfield, one of the most decorated intelligence officers in the country. Trusted, respected. A man whose word shaped policy at the highest levels. Emma's eyes blazed. Rodriguez, Sterling, Reeves, Blackwood, all of them died because of his greed. And you buried the truth right along with them. Sofia's breath caught. She had been part of that cover story. Delivered those folded flags. Reassured those families. But if Emma was right, then the truth was worse than negligence. It was treason. You understand the magnitude of what you're accusing," Vasquez whispered. Emma slammed her palm on the table, the sound cracking through the cell like gunfire. Her control finally slipped, rage flooding out. "I watched my family burn, Admiral. Watched them bleed out in that compound while the man sworn to protect them sold our lives for a paycheck. Don't you dare talk to me about magnitude." Her voice shook, but her eyes were iron. Silence stretched. The fluorescent light hummed. A guard shifted uncomfortably outside the door. Finally, Vasquez leaned back. She looked at Emma, not as a suspect, not as a liability, but as what she truly was. A survivor. A ghost who had come back with vengeance in her veins. Within hours, Thornfield's name would set fires across the Pentagon. Within days, arrests would follow. But for now it was just two women in a cell, one demanding truth, the other realizing she had lived a lie for 6 years. Vasquez reached for the SD card. Her hand trembled. "Emma," she said slowly, "if what's on this card is true, then we're standing at the edge of something far bigger than Iron Dawn." Emma's gaze was cold, unwavering. "Good. Then it's time someone fell." And as Vasquez slipped the card into her pocket, both women knew the storm was only beginning. Because the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was lethal. The file wasn't thick. It was small, black, no larger than a deck of cards. But inside that microchip Emma Carter had slid across the interrogation table lay 6 years of betrayal. Admiral Sofia Vasquez carried it like a live grenade. The hum of the Blackhawk's rotors still echoed in her ears as she landed back at the Pentagon. She hadn't slept in 40 hours, but her eyes burned with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. If Emma was right, if Malcolm Thornfield was guilty, then everything she had built her career on was balanced on a fault line about to shatter. The secure briefing room was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the muted tapping of keys. A dozen senior officials sat around the table, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent light. On the wall, data from the SD card flashed across screens. Financial transfers, millions, hidden in offshore accounts. Encrypted messages, time-stamped, routed through foreign servers. Flight logs, Thornfield's name linked to clandestine meetings he had no business attending. It was damning. It was undeniable. The silence broke when General Ross slammed his fist onto the table. 9 years. 9 years, this son of a bitch has been feeding our enemies classified intel. And we promoted him, trusted him. Across the table, Director Latham's face was ashen. If this leaks, it doesn't just embarrass us. It cripples us. Our allies will never trust our intelligence pipelines again. Vasquez's gaze was cold. Then don't think about embarrassment. Think about justice. Think about 7 warriors who died because Thornfield sold them out. Thornfield didn't resist. When the FBI and military police stormed his Alexandria townhouse, they found him in a bathrobe, sipping coffee as if nothing in the world had changed. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't even look surprised. "You've been expecting this," one agent muttered, snapping on the cuffs. Thornfield smiled faintly, like a man who had already calculated his odds and decided silence was his weapon now. "You're too late," he whispered. The words chilled every agent in the room. Too late for what? Back at Forward Operating Base Orion, news traveled fast. Soldiers whispered in mess halls. Officers shut doors a little tighter. Everyone had heard some version of the story, an invisible mechanic unmasked as something far more. Emma Carter sat alone in her temporary quarters, staring at the compass in her hand. The brass was warm against her skin, though the desert air was cold. Rodriguez, Sterling, Blackwood, Reeves. She whispered their names like a prayer, the compass spinning slowly between her fingers. For 6 years, she had hunted in silence, survived in shadows. Now the truth was finally in daylight. So why did it feel heavier than ever? The knock came just past midnight. Sergeant John Holloway stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his broad shoulders silhouetted by the dim corridor light. Emma studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Come to gloat." His jaw tightened. "No, ma'am. I came to apologize." He stepped inside, awkward, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. I thought you were a fraud. Thought I was protecting the honor of the uniform. But I was wrong. You lived it harder than any of us. Emma looked away, her fingers tracing the compass. You weren't wrong to question me. My whole life was a lie on paper. But you were looking at the wrong liar. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the base generators outside. Finally, Holloway cleared his throat. When this is over, if you'll have me, I'd follow you, wherever you're going next. Emma's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Careful what you offer, Sergeant. Ghosts like me don't walk easy roads. Within 48 hours, Malcolm Thornfield's name was splashed across secure channels, from D.C. to London to Tel Aviv. His decades of treason unraveled like thread in a storm. Every operation he had touched, every decision he had influenced, was now suspect. Dozens of missions had to be scrubbed. Assets burned. Lives uprooted. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a purge. But deep in the Pentagon, Sofia Vasquez knew something Thornfield had said still lingered like smoke. You're too late. What had he set in motion before his arrest? What trap was already out there, waiting to spring? Back at Orion, Emma sensed it too. The base was restless. Patrols doubled. Comms scrambled. Rumors of enemy movements flickered through the grapevine. She felt it in her bones, the way the desert wind shifted at night, carrying whispers through the wire. Thornfield's betrayal wasn't the end. It was only the opening act, and she had survived too much to believe otherwise. As dawn broke over the Syrian desert, Emma Carter stood at the edge of the base, the rising sun painting the horizon in blood-red streaks. She closed her hand around the compass, feeling its weight, its promise. Her ghosts were finally recognized. Their sacrifice no longer buried. But a darker truth gnawed at her. Thornfield had been a traitor, yes. But he hadn't acted alone. Someone else had pulled the strings. Someone still out there. And they weren't finished. Because when you drag a ghost back into the light, you risk waking the monsters hiding in the shadows. The autumn air at Arlington carried a chill, sharp and clean. Rows of white headstones stretched like soldiers in eternal formation, their silence heavier than any battlefield. 7 new stones stood out that morning, fresh, unweathered, etched with names that had been hidden for 6 long years. Rodriguez, Sterling, Blackwood, Reeves, and the others, Emma's family in blood, if not in name. The families gathered in small clusters, clutching folded flags, photographs, and memories they'd been told were buried under lies. Today, at last, the truth was given back to them. Admiral Sofia Vasquez stood before the crowd, her voice firm, but carrying cracks of emotion that even she could not suppress. For extraordinary heroism, she read from a citation, for valor beyond the call of duty, and for sacrifice in defense of their nation and their brothers and sisters in arms. The words carried across the cemetery, through the rustling leaves, settling on the shoulders of every soul present. Emma Carter stood at the edge of the formation, not in civilian clothes this time. Her dress blues were hers, earned, worn with pride. The ribbons on her chest reflected the truth of her service, not the fiction she had carried in silence for 6 years. She held the compass in her pocket, thumb pressing against the worn brass, grounding her in the moment. When the ceremony ended, and the families lingered in quiet embraces, Sergeant John Holloway approached. His expression was heavy, but there was something softer in his eyes now. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I nearly destroyed you, accused you of being what you despised most, and yet you stood taller than I ever could. I don't know how to make that right." Emma looked at him, really looked. For the first time, she saw not suspicion, but loyalty, a man who had finally understood. "You thought you were defending honor," she said gently. "Turns out you were. You just pointed your weapon in the wrong direction." She slipped a small card into his hand. Copper Dawn Securities, it read in sharp black print. "We'll need people like you. People who can see cracks before they spread. You in." Holloway studied the card, then looked back at her with a slow, resolute nod. "I'm in." Within months, Copper Dawn Securities was no longer just an idea. It was a force. 3 major intelligence breaches prevented. 2 more traitors uncovered. Enemies rooted out before they could bleed, more soldiers dry. Emma swapped her grease-stained overalls for tailored suits, her toolbox for encrypted servers and high-level clearance. But she never abandoned the compass. It rested in her pocket at every meeting, a quiet reminder of the faces she carried with her. Rodriguez's smile, Sterling's laugh, the way Reeves always hummed under his breath before a mission. Ghosts, but not forgotten. When a defense industry journalist asked her why she had stayed hidden for 6 years, Emma leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting to the compass on her desk. "I wasn't hiding from a truth," she said quietly. "I was hunting it." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Sometimes the best way to catch a traitor is to let them believe they've won. Late one evening, long after her office had gone quiet, Emma sat alone with the compass in her hand. She clicked it shut. The metallic sound echoed softly in the silence. Justice delayed, yes, but not denied. The war had cost her everything: her name, her team, her life as she once knew it. But it had also forged her into something unbreakable. Admiral Vasquez's words from that first morning in the cell drifted back, soft as a whisper. "Your intel missed one hell of a warrior." Emma Carter smiled faintly. The world had missed her, but never again. As the lights of Washington glowed faintly on the horizon, Emma looked up at the night sky. Stars shimmered, cold, distant, eternal. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every hidden warrior who had fought in silence, every family who had been handed folded flags, every soldier who had been betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them. And maybe, just maybe, her fight had only just begun. Because in the shadows of power, betrayal never truly dies. And somewhere out there, another ghost is waiting to be found. And now, I'll ask you the same kind of thought-provoking question Emma might leave her audience with. If you discovered a betrayal buried so deep it cost lives, would you risk everything to expose it, even if it meant becoming invisible to the world?